The U.S. House of Representatives has overwhelmingly passed a resolution lashing out at Russia over its foreign policies.
Resolution strongly condemning the actions of the Russian Federation under President Vladimir Putin, which has carried out a policy of aggression against neighboring countries aimed at political and economic domination.
The language of the non-binding document has been widely equated by critics to that of a Cold War-style rhetoric. RT's Gayane Chichikan now assessing the diplomatic falling out between America and Russia.
President Biden and I have been saying, and that is, we want to reset our relationship.
Let's do it together.
So we will do it together, okay?
In a matter of a few years, U.S.-Russia relations went from this
Today, the Cold War is over.
to President Obama putting Russia in a group with Ebola and ISIS in his ranking of international threats.
We're leading and dealing with Ebola in West Africa and in opposing Russia's aggression against Ukraine.
How did we get here? In 2011, when Russia did not oppose the UN Security Council resolution to protect civilians in Libya, Moscow did not expect that the NATO operation would result in Colonel Gaddafi's killing.
As we came, we saw, he died.
Soon afterward, Russia and the US found themselves at loggerheads over Syria, with Moscow opposing a military intervention. America's interference during the Ukrainian uprising last year seemed to have caught Moscow by surprise.
Well, it's amazing that the man who promised hope and change didn't deliver on hope at all and didn't change anything when it comes to foreign policy. The foreign policy at the State Department remained virtually the same as under Bush the younger, and one might even argue under Bush the elder and Reagan. It's the same people and their disciples who kept the continuum of policy towards Russia and Europe and other places in the world as well. This is not an exception, it's rather the rule.
Russia's response to the revolution in Ukraine, in turn, seems to have caught the U.S. by surprise. The tension between the U.S. and Russia peaked. This Thursday, the lower chamber of Congress passed a resolution that many call a declaration of war against Russia. The resolution, among other things, calls to reinforce NATO against Russia, to arm Ukraine, and to export U.S. natural gas to European countries so that they stop buying energy from Russia.
How can a resolution like this possibly contribute to making things better?
It can't. It won't. It's not designed to make things better. It's designed to make them worse. There are policymakers in this town who do not want things to get better. They want permanent conflict.
Scathing statements and resolutions coming from Washington almost invariably generate a response in Russia. And it's usually not a positive one. And then it's downhill from there. And where this slide will take us is anybody's guess. In Washington, I'm Ganesh Chekyan, RT.
And commenting on the resolution, the U.S. State Department has said that a hostile diplomacy with Moscow, I should say, it's actually not something that Washington is looking for.
I haven't seen the House resolution, to be candid with you. We've expressed our concern, of course, about the shrinking space for dialogue, for legitimate forms of opposition in Russia. We've said that repeatedly over many, many months. The President and the Secretary have spoken at length about this issue, about the fact that we don't want this kind of relationship with Russia.
But Robert Parry, editor of Consortium News, says that U.S. actions, well, they speak a lot louder than words.
Much of the vituperative language is similar to language that's been used by the State Department. We've seen statements from the Office of Public Diplomacy, which have followed these very harsh lines of language. In some ways, there's not a large amount of difference between the kinds of harsh statements that the State Department's made and what's included here. The issue really is that much of what the U.S. government has said has been hyperbolic and has lacked context. There has not been a willingness to look back and examine how this crisis in Ukraine evolved. This resolution goes to the most extreme interpretation, the most hostile possible interpretation of these facts, and directs it against the Russians.